much do you, push legislation like Superfund and work in that sort of nitty-gritty policy detail to get changes versus, being on the street side of that equation? So both of you, I get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, ACT UP definitely, we were by any means necessary was our strategy, and that coalesced very quickly into both an inside and an outside strategy that we maintained for a good 5 years before internal tensions kind of split that apart, and the group split apart to a group called TAG, the Treatment Action Group, that did almost entirely inside work, and ACT UP continued to do outside work at that point. But initially, it gelled perfectly, and we basically said, if our targets, our enemies, are willing to sit down with us, we're going to give them an earful. And we're also going to show them that we've done our homework. And I think that's what I was very struck by the movement you started, is you guys really became experts. And you did that report very much like ACT UP. We really spent the time to learn the science. One thing I want to say about Occupy, though, my first instinct was very much like you were saying, is that why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing these very traditional things that are just standard AIDS, activism 101, with spokespeople and messaging? But as I watched them, I had to say, you can't argue with success. They had more press in 1 week in October than ACT UP had in 5 years, and it was fascinating to me about how progressives and editorialists around the country implanted a message on top of the movement, and it was just all they had to do was present the anger, and they did that beautifully.
Well, can I jump in
Sure.
on that? I mean, I totally hear what you're saying, and I also really hear what you're saying. And to me, what we really need are a multiplicity of solutions, especially in a time when, maybe a short from your film that can enter the immediate news stream would be helpful, and then a faster fundraising cycle so you can get your movie, so people can skip that long period of time I gather the documentarians need to spend raising money. That can be fast forwarded. But just about this, let me just give a particular example. They got tons of press back when they were able to occupy things physically. Now we've been through a wave of violence. I mean, one of the things that struck me about this is how retro it looked to not have people in riot gear and to have people being allowed to engage in civil disobedience. That's not possible anymore in the United States. I can tell you that. It's going to just get more and more bloody if history is any guide until we have more mass movements like in Egypt. But one news cycle in England I was recently part of, the Metropolitan Police floated a leak, which I know from politics is a way of saying, how mad are people going to get about this? Can we get away with it? That they were going to use baton rounds on Occupy London. What are baton rounds? If you do a little research, they're this big, and they've killed women and children in Northern Ireland. And they were going to start shooting Occupy London protesters with this if no one got upset. So they floated this balloon. I happened to be on Newsnight the day before, so I was in touch with the producers. And I pitched a story to Newsnight, which they were responding to, saying, the Metropolitan Police are about to use baton rounds on Occupy London. Will you do a segment if I can get someone from Occupy London to show up on Newsnight? And, I got these, I'm sorry to be so cranky, but I reached out to Occupy London, and I got I have a cold, the dog ate my homework, They were not, you've got to understand when you're an activist like Martin Luther King, he was on, they were on, the great activists get it, that this is life and death. So they didn't show up. So the Metropolitan Police floated that trial balloon with no problem. Now the Metropolitan Police are planning to use baton rounds on Occupy London. They've issued, a round 2 of press releases. That's their policy now, because no one showed up to stop it. So as someone who was arrested, times have changed in America. It's not fun and games anymore. It's not even ACT UP anymore, with all due respect. It's no longer a time when people are not going to get hurt, when we're going to have due process. We have a law now that says that they can hold us indefinitely. It's going to be more and more like Egypt, or more and more like, emerging democracies where bad things happen to activists. And so in a time like that, I just think we need to be incredibly creative and proactive and do everything, essentially. Yeah.
Well, I agree with you, but don't agree with you. I mean, if you're organizing grassroots groups and you're organizing people, or you have a sudden organizing that comes up by accident, but not actually by accident, you don't have time for all of that. And I think it's the journalist's responsibility to go and figure out how to do it. Don't send somebody. I know. I'm saying we can disagree because if you churn out 500 people, the journalists will come. I mean, if you churn out some signs, the journalists will come. I don't think I ever wrote a press release.
Well, I mean, who knows how much quicker you might have gotten there. If
I don't
you were
think the
also
press
doing
is what got us what we got. Because when we held hostages, it was the evening news.
Yeah, now if you hold hostages, they will take you away to, that
Well, I'm not
places.
suggesting people hold hostages. I'm just saying when people do, I do not suggest, but when people do things that are extraordinary and outside the ordinary, the press almost always comes. The media almost always
So
comes.
again, with all due respect, the press has changed since the high point of Love Canal and the high point of ACT
No.
UP. There are fewer and fewer, just bear with me, there are fewer and fewer investigative reporters, and so now ACT UP will say to me, well, we have this website, go to our website, or, go here, go there. Most reporters are exhausted, they're underfunded, they're slashing reporters, they don't have time or energy, and if you want the real estate, you have to make it easy for the press to cover you, that's all I'm saying.
Mic check, mic check. Naomi, there's
sir.
no one from Occupy up there. You're being too critical in this panel about Occupy. Let the filmmakers talk, please.
We'll get to Occupy in a second. But Lois, I want you to finish your thought about
Well,
how the
what I was
press-
going to say is we work with 11,000 groups across the country.
Yeah.
And we train them how to organize. We train them how to march. We train them the strategy. We train them how to frame their messaging. So it's how dare they as opposed to parts per million or whatever. And we don't have any problem.
You're doing everything right, you're training them.
I understand, but if you look at the Fierce Green Fire, if you look at the film, you'll see Chico Mendes did not have a press person. And Chico Mendes did some really, really extraordinary stuff.
I think
You
you
will
have a
see
hard
so
time being
many
covered in this
people in
environment.
Fierce Green Fire who were successful in up till today around 350.org and other things that have happened that really document. People come out, they stand in the square, they stand at the Capitol, they surround the Capitol, and the media comes and they cover the story. And yes, it's sometimes very frustrating and you don't get exactly what you need. But I don't want people to be doing media. I want them to do organizing. I want them to go out there and raise Cain.
What about both?
Well, I support both. But what I'm saying is that would not be my first thing to train people is messaging. It's like you need a strategic plan to figure out who are you going after? How do you get them? How do you make them move? And you see that in the Fierce Green Fire. You'll see the different segments in which that was done by these various leaders. And you see that in ACT UP. When they took over the Capitol in New York, oh my God, it was fabulous. Yeah.
So I want to, Peter, it seems like the messaging was also part of the organizing, right? That was, we see it a little bit in How to Survive a Plague, but there are also all these other affinity groups in ACT UP that did counter messaging, and that was their focus of organizing. And so do you think that was a successful sort of strategy that ACT UP implemented, and how did that sort of evolve?
Yeah, we had to. I mean, it was a very complex disease. It was a complex message, and we had to boil it down into sound bites. We had to practice that. It was very hard to get the press to cover it in the angle that we wanted, in a format that was digestible, so that the country would be on our side. And we were very successful with this gentleman at the FDA. The message was very clear, and polling showed immediately that 80% of Americans wanted the FDA to change the way they do things and to give people with AIDS the drugs that they were demanding. If it weren't for that public sympathy, I'm not sure we would have had the success we had.
So I want to bring in Omar, because I think you actually do work in a very important context for this, which is that Egypt had entirely state-run and controlled media. There was no press, and in fact, what the press put out was total garbage propaganda. It was just lies about the extent of regarded support. So in that kind of context, it really, in Half Revolution, it's very clear that it was the masses that mattered. That generating 1 million people on the streets, mattered. So just tell me, what your experience was watching, the sort of media fake story unfold while you're on the streets. The experience is something totally different.
Around half the population in Egypt, the only access they have to a media is the state television. The first 5 days of revolution, all the state television they showed was a shot of the Nile, where boats were sailing on the water. Everything's fine. And then when as the fights became more severe against the police, and as the police were chasing away, they started spreading out all these lies, of course, that the demonstrators were thugs. They even opened all the prisons, let out all the murderers and the rapists and the worst scum. Of course, there was also, luckily for them, a lot of innocent people getting let out. But all these criminals, they got paid by government just to start creating terror and violence and murder and killing in the streets. And then the government could go out and say, "See, the demonstrators, look what they're doing to our country." And but at the same time, they came to a point where they completely shut down internet and telephones. So we couldn't communicate, we couldn't spread the messages out to the world, we couldn't upload material and so on, and people couldn't call each other on the phone to organize a meeting. But actually, the day there was most people on Tahrir Square was during those days where you couldn't even use a phone, and that's why it was all by word to mouth. And there was around 2 million people in Tahrir Square of the day known as the Millionaire, and that was only from spreading the message.